Live from the KDAL studios at Lake and Superior Street in downtown Duluth, it stars Over the Prairie with 8-time Minnesota Music Award winner Paul Metsa.
And I wish I could see stars over the prairie, stars over the prairie tonight.
Featuring cool people from all walks of life. Check out previous show podcasts at KDAL610.com. The phone lines are open at 218-722-0839. Now, here's Paul Metsa.
And I wish I could see stars over the prairie, stars over the prairie tonight. And I wish I could see stars over the prairie.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Stars Over the Prairie on KDAL, 610 AM, 103.9 FM. This is your host, Paul Metsa. My wingman with me in the studio every Saturday is my buddy, Chris Allen.
Good morning.
Did you get your snow shoveling done yet?
No. I live in an apartment complex, but I drove in from Solon Springs today, and that was a treat.
Oh, I bet.
It was kind of shady, I guess is the best way I could describe it. In some places, you couldn't even see the lines on the road or tires or anything like that, so I just had to guess where I was driving.
Well, I've got to give it up to the people that are running the snowplows here in Duluth, because it is the streets and alleys in my neighborhood, Lincoln Park, are clean as can be. It was funny. I saw a great little Minnesota image today when I was stop and get coffee before I come to the station. And there was this kid, maybe 6, maybe 7 years old, with a scooter.
Oh, wow.
Finding a couple of clean lanes on an off street and trucking down, and watched him long enough to know he had to pull over to clean the snow off his little wheels on the scooter. But I said, that is Minnesota right there. Truly Minnesota.
I've seen lots of the fat tire bikes around, too.
Oh, yeah. Those work well, or so they tell me.
Right.
But anyway, we are broadcasting from the Zenith City by the unsalted sea. You know, Chris, it's amazing. I've had people chime in, listening online from Dripping Springs, Texas.
Really?
From Woodstock, New York.
Okay.
And recently from San Francisco, California.
Wow.
So even though we love to take care of our people here in the Twin Ports, it's nice to know that we've got folks out there that like what we present, the kind of music and guests we have. And we do have some great guests today. Here from the studio, we are 237 somersaults down the hill from Bob Dylan's childhood home. And if you look out the window here at the Big K, you could see Bob Dylan's Way and a little bit, although it's kind of foggy today, the great Gitchigumi, Lake Superior. Now, Chris, what's the last time you somersaulted down the hill there from Dylan's place?
Last week. I hit a patch of ice and went...
Yeah, no doubt. You know, getting back to snowblowing, I had a buddy of mine who was going through some tough times about 6 or 7 years ago in Minneapolis, and he called me. He was a good friend of mine. He rented from me for a while my upper duplex in northeast Minneapolis, and said, hey, do you need a washer and dryer and a snowblower? And I go, you know, I don't have a snowblower. Yeah, I'd love that. And I could probably use a new washer and dryer. And he said, well, my key is in the mailbox. Pick it up on Sunday before the bank gets it on Monday. So I got to thank my friend Tommy Rye, who's out there. He works with, does running for Springsteen and Paul McCartney. He's since turned his life around and has a great gig. He's making buku bucks on the road with the rock and roll shows. But that Toro snowblower worked out great when I first came up here. Then it kind of went south on me for a little bit. My buddy John Ward knew a guy named Glenn in the west end of Duluth, so we took over to him in the middle of the summer, and by the first snowfall, I was ready to snowplow.
That's all I remember seeing as a kid was the Toro brand.
Oh, yeah. And was I reading something about Toro where they're going through some layoffs or closing a
Yeah,
plant.
yeah.
Wow.
They're having tough times right now.
That is the, well, I suppose part of it is just we haven't had the snowfall that we've had over the years.
I think part of it is that, and part of it is there's so many brands in the game now. You know, Toro was the king at one time, and now there's all kinds of different brands that have snow throwers, snow shovels, and, you know, all kinds of different snow removal tools.
Wow. Well, we wish them the best. Our guests today, we've got three great ones. We've got a booking agent that I never met, but he has booked over 45,000 shows since he started from his hometown of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I believe it was in the early, even in the early 70s, about 71 or so. Mike Kappas ran the Rosebud Agency for years, booked some of the greatest American artists like John Lee Hooker, John Hammond, Bonnie Raitt, and more. So we're going to be talking with him in the first hour. We have a taped interview with him. And then in the second hour, as we are coming up on our 1-year anniversary of Stars Over the Prairie, broadcasting on KDAL, 610 AM and 103.9 FM. I believe our actual anniversary was February 16th because we started on St. Urho's Day.
Yep.
But I think Saturday this year is the 15th. And I'm going to push to the bigwigs here at KDL. Maybe we do our first remote.
Well, today is February 15th.
I mean, excuse me, March.
Yeah.
March 16th, so March 15th. I'll have to look at a calendar to figure that all out.
Work it all out with the bosses.
What do you think about a remote?
I think we could do it. We just have to work it out with the bosses because we got to get the equipment.
Well,
we have that special equipment they use down at the deck. You know, the sports shows going on right now, and a lot of the shows on KDAL, they broadcast live from the deck down there.
Well, I believe the great Tracy Lundeen was just broadcasting live from there.
Yes.
Today with a sports show. But we always like to do birthdays and horoscopes here on Stars Over the Prairie. And we have a few more days of the age of Aquarius, although if you read the news, I call it the age of nefarious days. But anyway, if you were born on February 15th, your personal magnetism is great, and your need for loving, harmonious, and balanced surroundings is perhaps greater. You have a very unique spin on the world and love to share it with others. You are creative and usually good at writing or other expressive arts, and you also have a strong business sense.
Wow.
That is almost counterintuitive how I'm a writer myself and I have the world's worst business sense.
Yeah. I think a lot of musicians do. I mean, why do you think they're poor and have to sell their amps and then have to rebuy them from the, you know?
To sell their amps to buy another guitar.
Right. Or just to buy dinner. I've done that before. I've sold some instruments and pawned them back again.
What, were you going to the Pickwick and spending the big bucks?
No, I was down in Nashville, and I would there was a hamburger place, Jim's Hamburgers, and I would, get a little bit of money and be able to eat, one meal, get a burger from Jim's, and then go get my instrument out so that I could play it.
Speaking of Jim's Hamburgers, wasn't there? I know there was an occasion when I was bussing up here back when I was between cars. There was a great place by the bus depot. That was Jim's Hamburgers, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was just a really good burger.
Yeah.
And were they actually up on 4th Street where Uncle Louie's is now?
That part I'm not sure about. I know they had 2 locations, so that's probably it. And then it was just the West End one for a long time. Our boss, Tom Robick, and I used to do a morning show way back when, and we called Jim's Burgers on the air and ordered some, and then I drove over and got them. We were all talking about the best food in town, and I was like, I haven't had a Jim's Hamburger in a while. And Robick said, get in the truck. Let's go get some.
I went out. They've got a really good pork chop dinner at Perkins on the 55 plus menu. So I went over the other night because I love they give you 2 pork chops, mashed potatoes, and I Love the Corn as another side. And I got there, and I'm, ordering off the senior menu. Mm-hmm. Get ready to pay, and realized I left my wallet at home.
Oh, no.
A total senior moment, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't be. But there was a guy named Phil, a young waiter, and he covered for me. So I ran it back first thing the next morning with a nice tip for my buddy Phil. So thanks to Phil over at that West End Perkins. Say great birthdays today, Chris.
Okay.
Galileo, the Italian astronomer and physicist, the father of science. Remember science? We're forgetting science these days.
Science runs everything, it seems like.
Pretty much. Born in Florence, Italy in 1564, passed in 1642. Farmers out there would know the name Cyrus McCormick. He was an inventor and businessman, and he came up with the mechanical reaper. Did you ever do any time on a farm growing up?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My cousin Tom married a farm girl, and so there was one summer that they needed some help with throwing hay around and stuff like that, and I couldn't believe it. She's, maybe 5'8".
Yeah.
Whipping them things around, and the rest of us were like tired after 10 of them.
Oh, those farm girls are tough.
Yeah.
I knew a few over the years. Yeah, we had the original Metsa homestead.
Olmsted?
Yeah.
I'm related to the Olmsteds.
No, Homestead.
Oh, Homestead. I was like, oh my gosh, you and I might be related if it's the Olmsteds.
Well, then, we should try to get a hold of whoever runs the Olmsted homestead.
Yeah.
Just because we can. Anyway, Cyrus McCormick, who invented not the Grim Reaper, the Mechanical Reaper, was born in 1809 in Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. Boy, that sounds like a beautiful place to grow up.
Yeah.
Passed away in 1884. Susan B. Anthony. Some of you still might be sitting on those Susan B. Anthony gold dollars.
I have one.
She is the original American social reformer, started the women's suffragette movement. Born in 1820 in Adams, Massachusetts, passed in 1906. John Barrymore, the great American actor, was in the original Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Is also in It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, right. Great actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's John Barrymore Jr. as well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
1882, Mr. Barrymore was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, passed in 1942. Now, you'll know this guy. If you don't know his name, Chris Allen, you'll know his songs. Harold Arlen, American composer, wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Yeah.
It's Only a Paper Moon and Stormy Weather.
I met him when I lived in Nashville. Yeah, it was just a chance meeting. I was playing a session in Nashville for a friend of mine who had some free time on the overnight, and they were carting him around, bringing him to all the bars and everything, and he knew the engineers, so they brought him in to say hi, and they introduced me, and I didn't know who he was at the time.
Right.
And I looked him up, and wow, I was like, holy cow, I met that guy.
Harold Arlen was born in Buffalo, New York, 1905, passed in 1986. His lyricist who wrote the lyrics for Over the Rainbow was a guy named Yip Harburg. Now, here's a very interesting little, you could win $10 at a bet at any bar in America with this one. That little part in Over the Rainbow, and I wish upon a star.
Yeah.
Da, da, da. Can you whistle?
Not really.
Right, okay. Well, that little part, that little melody line, that is how Yip Harburg used to call his dog. He'd whistle that phrase.
Really?
Yeah. Now, there you go. Go win $10 at a bar tonight with
exactly.
that. Cesar Romero, come on. The great American actor, played Batman in the television series, among other things. Was born in 1907 in New York City, passed in 1994. Did you love Batman on television with Adam West as much as I
never
did?
watched the Batman TV show. I wasn't a big comic book character kid, so I didn't really get into it, but I loved Adam West's voice.
Yeah.
I knew his voice anywhere I heard it, and he was doing voice work way before he was, when Batman came back around and was famous again. He was already doing all kinds of voice work on TV.
Yeah, he was great. I mean, it was a wacky show for sure, but I sure enjoyed it. I mean, back then, you'd come home from school, you could watch the Monkees after school and then Batman at night. You're 10 to 12, 13 years old, man. That was like primo. television for young teenagers. Now, but I bet you watched The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Matt Groening, that's your man. Started as a cartoonist and wrote and founded the Simpsons television show. Was born in 1954 in Portland, Oregon. And one guy who I was a huge fan of, and I bet you were too, in 1964 in Madison, Wisconsin, a young man named Chris Farley was born.
Oh, yeah.
Only lived to be 33, died in 1997. Grew up in Maple Bluff, Wisconsin. I had a good friend of mine who passed away a few years ago. A superb golfer. A lot of golfers out there in the Duluth Superior area would know him, named John Hall. And John used to give Chris Farley golf lessons at the Maple Bluff Golf Course in Madison. I've got one more interesting Chris Farley connection.
Okay.
My friend David Carr, who is a really good friend of mine, I met him through Tom Arnold in the early 80s in Minneapolis. He was one of the finest journalists. He wrote for the Twin Cities Reader, Twin Cities Business, and City Pages. Went on and spent the last 10 years of his life writing the media column for the New York Times. Actually passed away in the newsroom, literally with his boots on. Wrote a great book called Night of the Gun about his descent into cocaine madness. Came back on top. Had a couple of twin girls that are both doing really well, and wrote a book about it called Night of the Gun. I'm on page 5. But anyway, Bob Odenkirk from Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad bought the rights to his book about 6 or 7 years ago and came to Minneapolis because he wanted to meet some of David's old running buddies and also see some of the places and bars and places he lived and bars he hung out with. And so he came to town. A guy named Brian Lambert, another great Twin Cities journalist, called me because he knew Carr and I were buddies. Said, hey, Odenkirk wants to meet some buddies of Carr's, and you first came to mind. So I met Bob Odenkirk at the CC Club at 26th and Lindale, and I said, we've got to meet in the back booth next to the women's can because that's where a lot of nefarious things went down back in the day. And so we met. We had a great hour-and-a-half conversation. If you go to either minpost.com, Brian wrote an article about it with some great pictures, and Google Paul Metsa and Bob Odenkirk. You go to my website, paulmetsa.com, you can read about it. We're having I'm a big Better Call Saul fan. I love Breaking Bad, but I fell in love with Odenkirk by watching Better Call Saul. So we're talking and we're having a great conversation. And back then I was getting in a little trouble with Arnold and Carr. And
right.
So Odenkirk asked me, he said, well, Metsa, how did you get out of the whole cocaine madness thing? And I said, well, cocaine, there's only a handful of options. I said, you either die or you end up in prison.
Right.
Or you go to treatment or you end up living in a van down by the river. Odenkirk goes, I wrote that sketch.
Yes, he did. He said, though, they had trouble selling that because it wasn't funny in the read. And then Chris Farley walks in with the undersized jacket and the glasses and started pulling that off. And they said, we got to put this on there.
Yeah. Well, the other connection, we had great Chicago singer-songwriter on Ike Riley a few months ago. I'm hoping to get him up to Duluth to perform. He's just amazing. In fact, there's a great documentary that Tom Rillo from Rage Against the Machine just put out last year on him. This won a ton of film awards called Don't Forget About Friday Night. And Ike Riley and his buddy grew up with Chris. And Matt Foley, who is the inspirational speaker, was one of their friends. Matt Foley is now a Catholic priest.
Oh, jeez.
Somewhere in Wisconsin or Illinois. So the skit was bursting with humor.
Yes, it was. That was a great skit. And Chris Farley said the whole goal of that sketch was to come out and make everybody break character.
Yeah. Well, and of course, you had Phil Hartman, too.
Yeah.
Another sad demise there.
Yes.
But, boy, I'll tell you what, that late 80s, early 90s Saturday Night Live crew was just amazing.
Yeah, it seems that they have a couple of good crews, and then they have like a sort of funny crew. Then they have a really funny crew again. It seems to go in waves.
Yeah. Do you watch it these days?
I don't.
Yeah. I see it every now and then. I don't think the writing is up to snuff.
I don't like the musical guests either.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of hip artists, not necessarily good artists.
Right. Well, although Timothy Chalamet, who's starring in the new Dylan biopic, as we call it, not biopic. That's for other people to call it that.
Yeah.
He did. Was on a few weeks ago, did 3 Dylan songs, 2 which I didn't even recognize because they were from so deep in Dylan's catalog, and then did an acoustic song that was really, really incredible. So that was good. But it does look like this SNL 50th anniversary is going to look to be good when they get a lot of the cast members back. So.
Yeah. Even something else that's interesting on Netflix, it's called Saturday Night. It's kind of the close to the truth kind of telling of the very first show.
Oh, yeah.
And how it came about, and they weren't very nice to Chevy Chase. I'll tell you that much.
Well, yeah, I've heard rumors that he's not the nicest human being to hang out with. But back then, you think in the late 60s, early 70s, you had all this really cutting edge humor. You had SCTV in Canada, you had Saturday Night Live here in America, and then you had. Were you ever into the Firesign Theater?
Yeah.
Oh my God!
And they had. You remember Friday Night?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a good show, too. They had some really good characters on there.
Really cutting-edge stuff.
Yeah.
Really kind of breaking what was left of that Eisenhower America wide open.
Yeah.
And as you and I, as young teenagers, were ready for that to happen.
Yes.
So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Mike Kappas. He has been a booking agent since about 1970 or 71, grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Booked a lot of shows in the Wisconsin area up through Minneapolis, moved out to San Francisco, took all his belongings and started working with an agency called Rosebud that he eventually took over and has literally booked. He's got paperwork in his archives, over 45,000 contracts of shows he's booked. I was very familiar with him. I've been able to open up shows for artists that he booked over the years, John Hyatt, John Paul Hammond, and others. And we're kind of Facebook buddies, so I reached out to him. Now, I want to tell folks ahead of time, there's a couple glitches in this recording. The computers and phone lines weren't working in our favor. They're just minor glitches, but bear it and get through it because we did and we got it done. But you're going to find this guy's story incredibly interesting. And when he talks about some of the artists he has booked over the years, a lot of people out there in the Stars Over the Prairie audience are going to know them and probably had been at a lot of those shows. So with no further ado, here's a phone call I had earlier this week with booking agent extraordinaire Mike Kappas.
I'm in the mood. I'm in the mood of love. Yes, I am. I'm in the mood. Lord, Lord, Lord. I'm in the mood, I'm in the mood of love. I'm in the mood, I'm in the mood. Oh, Lord, I'm in the mood of love.
Yes, my daddy told me.
I know he did.
Leave that man alone.
Yes, he did.
But my daddy didn't tell me, Lord God, what the man was putting down.
You know he did.
I'm in a mood for some of your love,
baby.
I'm in a mood. I'm in a mood for love.
just heard John Lee Hooker and Bonnie Raitt do I'm in the Mood for Love. And the man that we're speaking with Mike Campus had a little bit to do with that. Mike, what was your association with John Lee and Bonnie?
Well, Bonnie is still a dear friend, and we talk or exchange texts every week, basically, sometimes multiple times in a few days. John Lee, I talked to every day for 20-some years. He was best man at my wedding, which was his idea, before I was even ready to get married. But I came to a show with a girlfriend, and he wouldn't say anything at all. And a few months later, maybe a different one, and so on. And then I came once with this woman and went into the dressing room. I don't think he even said hello. He just said, "I'll be your best man." And he was, so John Lee and I had a really great relationship. And I put together that record, The Healer, the album, and financed it. It's a long story. I think we've got very little time. I don't know how we deal with this, but Van Morrison had contacted John Lee about producing an album on him, and John Lee was kind of flustered about what to do. I didn't manage him at the time. I was just his agent. But he asked me if I could meet with Van about it. And I did that, and we talked, and it ended up not going anywhere at the time. This was 1983. And then later on, Carlos Santana, who had been sitting in with John Lee on occasion, Carlos lived in the area and would come to the Sweetwater where John Lee liked to play a lot, way beneath his capacity, typical drawing power, but he really liked the owner. And so Carlos called me up and said, "If John Lee makes another album, I want to be a part of it." And George Thorogood, who I was representing at the time, did almost the same script, called me up and said, "If John Lee makes another album, I want to be part of it." So again, I'm not John's manager, I'm just his agent, but there was no manager. So at a certain point, I just kind of put this together, and knowing I'd been on the road with John where he did shows with Bonnie Raitt, and they had a really great relationship, really friendly, sweet relationship. And there's a long story that goes with Robert Cray and John Lee Hooker, and John Lee really enjoyed Los Lobos, and Charlie Musselwhite was longtime friends, so I thought putting together an album, not so much for star power or money, but just for basically an audio scrapbook where John Lee could say, "This is me with my pal Carlos Santana," and Carlos could say the same thing, and just for satisfaction of them being able to point to their collaborations, and put that together, paid for everything. I'm not a musician, and Roy Rogers was at the time in John Lee Hooker's band and kind of a musical director, and John had trust in him. So I talked to Roy about being the producer in the studio, and I brought in all the special guests and everything, and put the thing together and finished the record, and I just felt like it deserved a wide distribution, more than Alligator made me an offer. It was a small offer. It seemed like everybody was thinking in terms of comparing that record to John Lee's more recent records, which hadn't been selling much because there was about 125 records. You could buy John Lee's greatest hits for $9.99, or why pay $15 for a new one? So people were looking at that, not the potential. And it was a hard sell, and I finally got Chameleon Records, Stephen Powers, who I know you just interviewed. As a matter of fact, I offered to him, and they passed initially. And they came back to me later on when I guess they got an investor that put some money into the company and offered me a deal, which was not great, but it was okay. And the record, we had a lot going for it as far as media attention. John Lee's track with Bonnie Raitt was a 5-star rotation on VH1 in particular. So was Robert Cray's duet with John Lee, and so was Carlos Santana's track with John Lee. And there was a good story there, a guy who's 70-some years old. In England, it was a top 20 album. It outside of America, blues does better, and we did great worldwide with that.
And he wins the Grammy at 73 years old.
Yeah, and it was him, and it was strange because at the time they didn't separate singles and albums, so John Lee was up against himself. There's 5 nominees, and one of them was the Healer album, and one of them was the duet with Bonnie Raitt. And the three of us sat together. This is the pre-televised ceremony where you can sit wherever you want as long as the seat is open. So the three of us were together. And, it was a great thing because it was Bonnie's first Grammy. It was John Lee's first Grammy. But Bonnie went on to win 3 more Grammys that night and be the big winner of the night. And it just really kicked her album back up on the top of the charts. And it was a big breakthrough for her. One less Grammy. Sorry.
Congratulations. Now, what was it like sitting in the studio when those songs were being cut?
I didn't go to the studio all the time. I was with John Lee for the Santana one. It's not a shocking thing. It's interesting, though, but when you talk about the studios, John Lee had a very distinctive sound, but other musicians could have the same guitar, do the same tunings exactly, and it just wasn't the same. John Lee could sit down, even a different guitar, or whatever the situation was, and just instantly have that unique sound of his own, that really deep blues sound, So, I mean, it was John Lee. He'd sit down, he'd want to get going right away. So Roy Rogers, knowing this, would keep the guitar away from John until everything else was ready, and then put the guitar in his hands, and then go forward.
I'm just thinking, I think I got a letter at some point from Roy Rogers, and on the front of the letter it had his address, and then I remember it saying, chaps, not chops.
No, chops, not chaps.
Chops, not chaps, yeah.
I'll tell you one quick one, if I can. We had Keith Richards into the session with John Lee, and John Lee he was, used to going in, and it's like the old Muddy Waters story. I'm going to make a great record if it takes me 3 days, But John Lee would like to do it and get out, so Keith Richards, we flew in, and him and his manager, and flew them in first class from New York, and we flew his, or maybe we didn't fly him, his guitarist, but his guitar tech came up from L.A. with a bunch of guitars, and we were doing the session, and John Lee finishes a song and said, ain't gonna get any better, and he wanted to walk out the door, and Keith was barely warmed up, he's like, what? But it was over, and so he jammed with the rest of the band a little while, and then partied after that, but people were not used to that sort of situation. Just do it once, and we're done. That's it.
It must have been a
lot of time in the studio.
Did you, you said you talked to John Lee Hook every day. Did you, what was like going up to John Lee's house and hanging out with him? What was that like?
That was kind of awkward, actually, because John Lee would be susceptible to taking in whoever needed a place to stay, kind of, and especially young women. But so you'd see people basically taking advantage of him a lot, and that was not a great thing. But John Lee himself, to be around, when we started doing commercial videos and everything, directors would submit ideas, and they're all about deep, dark Mississippi and everything. And the fact of the matter is, John Lee personally was always having fun. He loved people, hanging out with people, and joking around, and playing a prank, even whatever. He was not off stage. It was not deep, dark stuff. It was good times.
Mike Kappas, we only got a little over a minute left. You've got to be writing a book, and it's going to be several volumes, I'm sure. But what do you do now that you're officially retired from Rosebud?
I'm on the board of the Arhoolie Foundation. Like I said earlier, I guess I've worked with Little Village Foundation. I'm not officially working with them now, but I've been assigning several artists to that label, which is an incredibly unique label where the artist keeps all the rights and 100% of the income. It's a foundation, so they live on donations. I've been writing a little bit, and I'm consult for the estate of Captain Beefheart, who I worked with back in the day, and actually spent a lot more time with him after I stopped booking, and he stopped touring. We remained friends for 20-some years after he stopped touring, and so I've been helping his wife, his widow, and who's the executor of his estate. I'm mentoring for the Grammy University. This is my third year doing that, and I get contacted all the time by people looking for ideas. As a matter of fact, one of the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer asked me about a week or two ago about ideas for his next album, and I've delivered ideas to him, for different concepts as well as a song or two. So I'm busy every single day, constantly. So it's all good.
Hey, Campus, thank you for your time. We need to chat several more times. You have been such a part of such great American music history. Like you said at the beginning of the interview, 45,000 shows you've got paperwork on. So God bless you for all your work. It's a pleasure to speak with you in person, and good luck with everything, and I hope we can stay in touch. And please give my best to our buddy John Paul Hammond.
I will do that, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, Mike, we'll be in touch. Thank you. Have a great day.
Right, take care.
Bye-bye. All right, that's Mike Kappas, Legendary Booking. We got a little more from him we're going to play, but we want to hear from a few of our sponsors. I want to remind you, if you are driving up to northern Minnesota, maybe do a little ice fishing, a little skiing, a little snowmobiling, stop in at my favorite bar on the Iron Range, Flamers Bar, run by the great Gary Flame on Chestnut Street and 2nd Avenue. Just get on, when you're going on 53, take that 2nd Avenue exit, get to the main drag. You can't miss it. It's got beautiful neon, and it's a real hometown hang. Reasonably priced drinks, good sports memorabilia, and if you want to play pull tabs, that's your place. And I want to remind you, too, I am back playing Carmody's Pub on Sundays. We're taking a little break from the Tilttown Titans as we wait for the snow to go and everything to get over. But I'll be doing a solo show from 4 to 6 every Sunday at Carmody's Pub, 308 East Superior Street. And we will be bringing the Tilttown Titans back soon. But come down and say hi to me. And now here's a few words from people that keep us on the air.
I'm Joe, and I had Z-LASIK at Weiss Eye Center. The funny thing is I absolutely hated buying a contact solution because I thought it was such a racket having to spend $15 on a bottle of contact solution. And that's just one thing, is just not having to buy that stuff anymore, or glasses or anything like that. For me, it's mainly just I like to hunt and fish and everything, and not having to bring that stuff along, especially in the winter when I go ice fishing and stuff. It gets a pain when I get to the end of the day taking my contacts out, and then if a rattle reel goes off in the middle of the night, I'm fumbling for my glasses to go and try and catch a fish.
Weiss Eye Center is the only clinic to offer blade-free Z-LASIK in the Northland. To find out more and to arrange your free consultation, call 218-625-1917 today or visit weisseyecenter.com for more information. Weiss Eye Center. See the best.
If you're looking for a great hang in downtown Duluth, I highly suggest Carmody's Irish Pub. They're located at 308 East Superior Street, open Tuesday through Sunday. The host and hostess are Eddie and Liz. Eddie is a retired Chicago cop. If he happens to be in the club when you're there, talk to him. He's got more stories than I do. They've also got a great jam session every Tuesday night from 8 to 11 with Bruce Woodman. So if you're a musician, tried and true, that has been out there playing and just want to go try out some new stuff, go down and hang out with Bruce and the crew. Or if you're just up and coming, bring your horn or your stringed instrument or just want to sing, go sit in with Bruce Woodman every Tuesday night at Carmody's Pub, 308 East Superior Street.
River City Records and Books, voted Best Record Store of 2023 in the Twin Ports by the Duluth Reader, has in stock thousands of new and used vinyl records, from classic rock to punk, grunge and metal, to hip-hop, rap, and jazz. reggae, and dub. Thousands of books, CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray, and VHS. Also a large selection of cassettes, comic books, and music magazines. Stop in and see them at 1814 West Superior Street in the friendly Lincoln Park Craft District. Open 9 to 7, 7 days a week.
Stars over the prairie, KDL Radio. And now, here's Paul Metsa.
And this is Paul Metsa, and that was my friend the Divas. Worked up that little spot for Stars Over the Prairie when they were on the show. Oh, I don't know. Was it, I think, last spring? And we're coming up on our first anniversary. We're working on doing a live broadcast from somewhere. I was going to have my Tulsa friend Greg Lou on today, but we noticed that we might have enough content with finishing out the rest of the interview with Mike Kappas. So we'll be talking to Greg Lou. He's got a good buddy whose mother was married to Bob Wills that we hope to hook up with next week. And if all goes well and the creek don't rise, we will going to have Teresa Knox, the owner and the lady that refurbished Church Studio. Here's more with Mike Kappas. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. We want to wish everybody a very happy Valentine's Day weekend. I've got a great guest on tonight. Mike Kappas has been a shaker and mover, talent buyer and booking agent in the American music scene for over 50 years. He began his career in his hometown of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. During college, he promoted regional bands with friends and became a licensed booking agent in 1970 at the ripe age of 19. Just over a year later, he was invited to join an agency in Milwaukee. In his 5 years working full-time as an agent there, he also bought talent for several showcase clubs and a few festivals and universities. As a talent buyer and promoter, he booked artists as diverse as Asleep at the Wheel, Jimmy Cliff, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, and jazz artists like Grover Washington Jr., Weather Report, Rahsaan Roland Kirk, and George Benson, to name but a few. He also booked some rock and roll, including MC5, Styx, and Ted Nugent. Over the years, he established relationships with his Rosebud booking agency with Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, John Lee Hooker, Mose Allison, John Hyatt, John Hammond, and more. He's also in the Blues Hall of Fame, sponsored by the Blues Foundation. His associations with artists with the Rosebud Agency has garnered him 116 Grammy nominations and 28 Grammy wins, 10 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions, 7 Grammy Lifetime Achievement Awards, and more. And we've got him on the show, and we are happy to have him. I've been familiar with his work for years, and we are excited to have Mike Kappas join us to the broadcast today. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, your name precedes you. In fact, in 1982, my band Cats and the Stars had the unique honor and pleasure of opening up for one of our heroes, a man who remains a hero and now a friend, John Hammond Jr. And we sent you a letter because we were looking for a booking agent at the time. You sent me a nice letter saying you were too busy for a band you've never heard of, but you were real kind. I still have that letter in my archives, but I appreciate you being so kind with that letter. But I've so familiar with your work over the years, and I want to expose my audience to just some of the artists and things you've done. How did you actually, at the age of 19, get interested enough to start booking shows?
Well, actually, first, if I can correct you on a couple of things. My situation, I added artists that I'd never heard of before if I was blown away by them, but I was working for 80 to 100 hours a week, nonstop for 37 years. And so I just couldn't do much more. And we had to turn down, and I apologize to all of them, that we had to turn down 1,000 to 1,500 groups a year who came to us for representation. One other thing is there is John Hammond Jr. is actually the Columbia Records representative, John Henry Hammond Jr., and the blues artist that you opened for is John Paul Hammond. It's a common mistake that people think of him as Junior because his father was so famous, but his father never used the Junior. His father had a different name, John Henry Hammond, as opposed to the blues artist John Paul Hammond. But they are father and son, but it's a common mistake there on that. Anyway, sorry to correct you right off the bat. You were saying how I got started?
Yeah.
So, and I hung out with friends who were in bands, and one band in particular in our small town of Eau Claire. We hung out at their house, listened to records and everything, and I loved everything I was hearing, and I learned a lot more there than on radio. Our radio options were pretty limited to country and top 40 and everything. And I really had an incredibly unnecessarily small town mentality, thinking I would never do anything special or go anywhere special. And it was not until I was about 19 years old I thought, wait a second, there's no reason I can't go to Minneapolis and buy a ticket and see a show like anybody else. So my sister, who lived in Minneapolis, had a Dayton's credit card that was a typical ticket outlet. And I had her buy some tickets for myself and friends to see the Steve Miller Band and the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, which included, I think it was Eric Idle. It was one of the guys from Monty Python. And at the Guthrie Theater, I think, and went up there and was just blown away by how great live music could be when it's played by somebody beside your classmates, and in high school. And I was just knocked out, and within a couple of weeks I had booked with friends of mine. We had kind of a counterculture version of a fraternity, and we put on a show with actually a Minneapolis group, White Lightning, and the Tongue Band from Menominee, Wisconsin. That was my first concert. But I was just blown away, and just one thing led to another. Promoted more concerts with friends. And then eventually was invited to join an agency in Milwaukee where I bought some talent from. Anyway, that's the beginning.
To see a show at the Guthrie Theater, probably one of the most hallowed concert venues ever, I think, in America. I had the pleasure of playing there 8 times. The first time, Cats and the Stars, we opened up for Ry Cooder in about 1983. And I had seen, coming from northern Minnesota on the Iron Range, Mike, we would go down and see plays at the Guthrie Theater. But I had never seen a concert there until 1972. I went down to see Leo Kottke, who did a one-set solo, and then a set with Billy Peterson and Bill Berg on drums. They were, of course, also featured on all those early Leo Kottke records. And I walked out of there that night as a 17-year-old saying, this is what I want to do with my life. So I guess we have a connection there where an experience and concert at the Guthrie Theater kind of formed our paths in life.
Yeah, it's there's so many stories like yours of somebody seeing somebody amazing and deciding that's what they want to do and become a guitarist or whatever the case might be. In my case, I guess I'd already had a guitar and bought it from somebody down the street, and it was an acoustic guitar with a broken neck. I bought it for about $8, and it did not lead to a career in performing, but I was always better at business and organizing things, so I never had like my dream of what I'm going to do. One thing just led to another. But yeah, the Guthrie is great. Great starting place. I saw a number of artists there. Cat Stevens, various other people.
I ask you, I would encourage anybody to learn more about my guest, Mike Kappas. Go to rosebudus.com, just to get a feel for this man's history. How many shows, Mike, over the last 50 years do you think you personally booked, you and your agency?
I know the agency, Rosebud Agency, but I booked shows. I worked at another company in Milwaukee for 5 years, and then I promoted shows, but I saved actually contract worksheets, and I've got them in my basement, 45,000 plus, actually, all over the world. Every single state in the United States and many, many countries in every single continent, except Antarctica.
When I was doing my research, your artist and my friend John Paul Hammond did over 4,000 shows with Rosebud.
Right. That was well before we phased out of the agency. You know, I just at one point got curious and I counted up his shows, because when I first started working with him, he was doing about 250 shows a year, every year, and I counted them up, and 4,000 was coming, so I made a special thing of that. John was started with us in '77, and I've spent more time with him than with any other artist. He stayed with me until I phased out of booking in 2014. And we're still very good friends. I've talked to him just last week, as a matter of fact.
I was talking to a fellow that knows John out in New York, and he said John's working on his autobiography, which I would buy 10 copies of immediately just to share with friends. To me, Mike, John Paul Hammond is probably one of the most powerful solo acts I've ever witnessed.
John put everything into every song and every show. I mean, it seems like he went into a trance at a certain point, you know, stomping his feet for time and blowing harp and playing guitar like two people at once and singing, you know, just totally dedicated and really incredible. And he was also the ultimate gentleman, you know. He put so much into it. This is so rare. I'm sure experienced it a million times with promoters complaining because the show didn't do well. And there was a few of those shows with John, but they didn't complain. They said, I've got to promote it better next time because John was amazing, you know, and I've got to do a better job promoting. That is so rare, promoters taking, the responsibility for a smaller crowd and praising the artist, you know. John, and back to your point, yes, I think the autobiography is finished, and they're just dealing with some final things before publishing. Not only that, right now, there's a documentary being filmed on John, and I've kind of helped the people putting it together by, you know, giving them contacts for various different artists.
Live, it stars Over the Prairie with 8-time Minnesota Music Award-winning songwriter, musician, author, and historian, Paul Metsa. Check out previous show podcasts at KDAL610.com. Now, here's Paul Metsa.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.
Germs, you were going to say, right? Ladies and germs.
Yeah, stay away from the germs. Anyway, this is Paul Metsa. You listen to Stars Over the Prairie with my wingman, Chris Allen. Before I forget, I will be doing a special solo show starting every Sunday at Carmody's Pub. The Tilton Titans will be joining me as the weather gets warmer. I got a great new band. But in the meantime, telling stories and playing songs at 308 East Superior Street at Carmody's Pub tomorrow and every Sunday thereafter. We've got, next week, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Tulsa, where I just spent a great week a couple of weeks ago. We're going to be talking to Tulsa native Greg Lou, who was kind of my tour guide down there. Hopefully, Teresa Knox from Church Studio that Leon Russell started in a beautiful old church in Tulsa, and more. We were going to have him on today, but we found out we had enough stuff, so we'll talk to Greg next week. But now we are back with Mike Kappas, great booking agent, and after him, we're going to be listening to a little bit of our interview with Tom Paxton, who we did at the end of September when he was in town playing with the Don Juans at the West Theater. Here's Mike Kappas. My guest for the whole show is legendary booking agent Mike campus. Mike, when you started Rosebud, who was your very first signing?
Well, it's an interesting story. I was working at an agency in Milwaukee, and I was bringing talent into this club in Milwaukee, primarily Teddy's, but also a couple other clubs. And so I'd reach out to Mose Allison or John Lee Hooker or all these, Eddie Harris, various different artists. And some of them would say, well, yeah, we'd love to play there, but, coming from the coast for a couple nights at this club is not really practical. So I set up kind of a circuit of other clubs around the Midwest that would be interested in the same type of artists in Iowa City and Chicago and Minneapolis and Eau Claire, various other places. And Eddie Harris in particular, I did a lot of work with. I ended up doing everything except the West Coast for him, which he was dealing with via Keystone Music Agency, which is an offshoot of the Keystone Corner Jazz Club here. And I wanted to get into a bigger metropolis, and he put me together with these people that ran the Keystone Music Agency. Turned out it was a very disorganized situation. I didn't get paid at all first 3 months I was there, and I came to the office one day and the phones were cut off because he hadn't paid the phone bill either. So I went home, and I just moved into this apartment, didn't bring much of anything with me in my little car coming out to San Francisco. And so I was managing John Hyatt at the time, and I checked in with John, and he said he'd stick with me wherever I did whatever, because I wasn't sure I'd continue on my own. I thought maybe I'd hook up with somebody else. Eddie Harris, the same thing, and he checked in with him, and he said he'd stick with me, and I called Michael Bloomfield, who I'd done a few shows with, and we talked about 45 minutes, and he said, "You're the most logical agent I've ever talked to. I'll do everything with you." So he was the first fresh signing, and then also Anthony Braxton, who I'd done some shows with at Keystone Music. And those are the first ones, and then adding Mose Allison and John Lee Hooker soon after, because I was doing a lot of their bookings at the time.
Wow. Mike Bloomfield, my God, one of the greatest electric blues guitar players of all time. Tell us about what was Mike like as a human being? I know he had he came out of Chicago with Paul Butterfield and Charlie Musselwhite, and really revered the old blues cats, and actually, I believe, did some interviews with some of those guys. But what was he like as just a human being?
Well, you kind of hint at it. He was like an encyclopedia of blues. He really knew his stuff incredibly well and played it incredibly well. He had some demons, He had horrible insomnia, which he tried to cure by, special, not necessarily doctor related aids. And so he developed a reputation for not making all of his gigs, and I've heard some of this. Elvin Bishop was not only a later client of mine, but he's a good friend. We just talked last night, in fact. And he's told me some Bloomfield stuff where he was really nervous, and he'd take some pills to help with that, and it didn't help with other things, But he was this really straight, sweet guy. He told me one time about this, when we started working together, about this TV show, and he wanted to see if he could get on the show, and it's a brand new TV show, and I didn't have a TV in San Francisco yet at that time. I picked one up in a yard sale for $9, and it was horrible TV, rolling picture all the time, and kind of tar coming out where the antenna comes out, the rabbit ears. And anyway, the TV show was the Letterman show, So I wasn't able to get him on there, but I told him right in the start, that I don't mind if he takes 1 date a year or 300 dates a year, as long as once he makes a commitment, he sticks to it. And I'd booked him a series of dates in New York, and he usually only took a couple dates at a time, but this time he took more than usual, and I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes," and then as the dates were approaching, he canceled the dates, and so that was the end of our relationship. But he was straightforward. I mean, while we were working together, he said he was going to a halfway house for something, and And I said, "Oh, that's too bad," you know. And he says, "No, I'm still okay. I can get out for gigs." So, you know, I'd call him at the halfway house to book gigs and everything. A troubled guy personally, you know, but also really sweet being.
I had the honor of course, the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. I had the honor of booking Sam Lay, the drummer, at back when I was music director at a place called Famous Dave's Barbecue and Blues in Minneapolis, where I went from about 2001 to 2008. Over that time, I also got to know Minneapolis native keyboard player for the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, Mark Naftalin. And presented Mark in concert, just a very soft-spoken, but another incredible blues musician, that generation of white guys that really learned their stuff and inherited that blues tradition in a very honest and soulful way.
Yeah, I have stories about both of those guys, and I may have booked one or both of them at the club. But Sam Lay, well, Mark Naftalin, I can say briefly, right on top of Bloomfield. Mark was, you know, Michael was not always reliable, but Mark was, you know, didn't want to lose any gigs, you know. So Mark would, I booked Michael in various different formats with Nick Gravenites and a few other people, and with Mark, and sometimes with both of them. But I could kind of, if Mark was involved in a Bloomfield gig, I could count on it to happen, because I think Mark would crawl through a bathroom window in Michael's house to make sure he got to a gig. You know, he wouldn't want to lose the gig. So Sam Lay, I was dealing with Beloit College, Beloit, Wisconsin, right on the Wisconsin-Illinois border. And somebody fell out and they needed to replace a gig. And I was talking to Sam Lay and got him the booking. And then he called me back and he said, you know, I could bring along Chicago Slim for another $150. And I checked with the school and they said, okay. And then he says, I could bring along the Lucille's band for another $150. And this grew to be this all-star band kind of. And then I started booking various different shows with Sam in this all-star format as well. He was a good man. Rich Kirch, who played guitar with John Lee Hooker, had some great stories about Sam too. I mean, he's really quite a character. But I saw him not long ago when I worked at this Chicago a festival in Chicago, and he was on the festival, and it was a nice reunion. And he passed away probably about a year or so after that.
You know, Sam, he's a great guy to work with. In fact, in my stash of 2,000 or 3,000 CDs, he had sent me the CD he was pushing at the time, and he was a really great country western singer. Mm-hmm. That music?
I think he also had a job as a security guy, and he had a thing about guns, you know, which luckily he didn't use any in a dangerous way, but that's one of the stories I'd heard from Rich Kirch about a really bizarre collection of guns and everything, but a really sweet guy at the same time. And he filmed Howlin' Wolf, and he was in Howlin' Wolf's band, you know, for a while, but he also had some classic films of Wolf and who knows who else. But he was very paranoid about being taken advantage of and somebody else getting a hold of him. And I think they have gotten out since then, since his passing. Maybe even before his passing.
Yeah, well, it was an honor to work with that guy. So how did... I want to go back a little bit to the early, mid-'70s, because when... even though I was still living up on the Iron Range back then, we would drive down to a place called The Joint in Eau Claire that when we were getting this interview set up, said you used to book. I remember a great Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee show there.
Yeah, well, The Joint was a hangout on Water Street, which is right across the river from the university in Eau Claire, so it was not only locals, but people from out of town. A tiny place, and it just a kind of a rectangle with a very thin going back. You know, it went back further, but it was not so wide, especially with a bar on one side. And we actually I booked. I knew the owner, and I talked to him, and I would come back to Eau Claire when I lived in Milwaukee. I'd come back on a regular basis, and so he knew what I was up to, and I was doing, individual bookings for Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and Mose Allison and various others. And so the owner, Bill Nolte, and I talked, and I brought in a number of artists with him. Mose, John Hammond, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, maybe Asleep at the Wheel, various others in the Woody Herman Band, which is a huge band. He told me that he could squeeze him in, so I believed him. So the room widened a bit in the back where the bar didn't go all the way back, and so there was a little more space. And he set up these really minimum, like five rows of bleachers, just 5 levels, probably about 10 feet high or something, and so that he could squeeze in more people to help pay for the band, because it was a tiny club. Jammed, it would hold about 100. So anyway, yeah, I did a lot of bookings with them.
Wasn't now, if my memory serves me correctly, was Bill Nolte a college professor?
Not that I knew of. He may have been earlier, but not that I knew of. He just ran, from, say, 1968 or 70 or so, when I started going to the place. That was his whole thing.
Now, Sonny Terry and Brian McGee, of course, they were together for over 5 decades, and they were notoriously, as the word has it, they never got along or really didn't speak to each other when they were off the stage. Can you tell us a little bit about that relationship?
I can, because I asked Sonny about it when I booked him in Milwaukee one time. And I'm like, what's wrong? He says, well, the first 30 years were pretty good, but the last 30 years have been kind of downhill, And I thought, gee, give you another 30 years, you might break up, But they had to, he had to have 2 different contracts and share the same contract with both of them, so that, and they lived as far apart in the United States just about as you possibly could. Brownie was in Oakland and Sonny was on Long Island, and you'd have to pick them up in separate cars at the airport and separate rooms, obviously, but and pay them separately. You'd pay each one the same amount, but separately. They just. And it got really, really bad later on. I saw them out here later on where Brownie hired a different harp player, I think it was Mark Hummel actually, to play with him, and he wouldn't play on stage with Sonny. They'd be sitting next to each other on stage, but Brownie would have Mark play harp with him, and then later on, Sonny hired a guitarist to play with him so that he didn't have to count on Brownie for the guitar parts, and it was just silly, I remember being at the Great American Music Hall here, and they were going through that routine, and people yelled out from the audience, play it together, but legendary guys, great performers, great artists, but not great friends.
I bet you booked a gig that my band Cats and the Stars, we opened up for Mose Allison at Williams Pub in Minneapolis.
Very possibly. I don't remember it offhand, but yeah, Mose was a different animal for me, because he was very frugal, shall we say, and most of the artists, when I took them on, I wanted to make sure it's exclusive, so there wasn't one agent undercutting the other, and then the one that gets the offer is the one that's quoting the lower price. It's not good for the artist either. So I always wanted exclusivity, but Mose wasn't using another agent, but he didn't want to have to pay me for something he'd already done directly. So, I booked Mose for a long time, but he was one of the rare ones where I was advertising him on the roster, but he was not 100% exclusive. But I just, it was an honor to work with Mose. And
is Mose still with us? Is he still alive?
No, he died probably 10 years ago or so now. And I was around him toward the end. I was not booking him anymore. I may have been even after I stopped Rosebud, but I saw him in New York, and I came in to this jazz club, and he came up. I saw him before I even sat down, and he said, I've been forgetting lyrics, and I have to keep the lyrics on the piano, on the music stand on the piano and everything. I said, well, there's a lot of people that forget lyrics. Tom Waits had a teleprompter that he rented out because anybody over 40 years old with a certain number of albums had problems forgetting stuff, but he did forget, and during the set he would forget a lyric, and the band would just kind of circle around and come back and give him another shot at it, and then he came up to me after the set and apologized, which was totally unnecessary, but he was a sweet guy, really intelligent guy, extremely intelligent, and just kind of cool. He wanted, when we set up hotels for him, he wanted to be ideally near like a high school or college where there was a track so that he could go jogging, and he would have, unlike a Chuck Berry or Bo Diddley, who toured on their own and worked with local backing bands, which frequently was a nightmare, especially for Chuck. But Moe's had certain bass players and drummers in different parts of the country, and he'd do a series of dates in a certain part of the country, and he'd call up his guys who were really top-notch players. And so he did it right, and the others could have too, but Mose did that right. He traveled by himself and kept his overhead low, but he didn't sacrifice the quality of the music. But knowing great people.
I think Stan Kenton had a similar routine where he had rhythm sections of different parts of the country, and he'd come in and he had worked with the guys, so he was always assured that he'd put on a good show. All right, we are back with Stars Over the Prairie. That was my good friend who I've never met in person, but I've been very familiar with his work.
A long-distance friend.
Long-distance friend, yeah. We really hit it off, though. We talked quite a bit between the actually taping the interview. Mike Kappas, we're going to have him on again, man. He promised he might be able to hook up with Elvin Bishop.
Wow.
He's good friends with everybody, but he'd be a good pipeline for us to get some other great musicians on the air. Speaking of great musicians on the air, after we hear from our sponsors, we are going to listen to an interview I did with the great folk singer Tom Paxton, who just performed in Duluth at the age of 87. Sounded like $1 million. I enjoyed the show with my friend, Professor Ann Margaret Daniel, who was in town visiting, and we just had a wonderful time with the band, the Don Juans. But first, we will hear from the people that keep Stars Over the Prairie on the air, and if you have a business and would like to get in front of a very committed audience with really reasonable advertising rates, just email me personally at paul@paulmetsa.com. Here's some of our friends that keep us on the air.
I'm Zach, and I had Z-LASIK at Weiss Eye Center. I was sick of wearing glasses. I've had glasses since third grade. Dealing with the nuisance of glasses kind of reached that point of I just need to get LASIK. I was a little nervous, but knowing now what that process all entailed, I wouldn't have been nervous if I knew. Everybody's really nice here. Not a bad thing to say about anybody. Everybody's happy, and everybody here's nice. And I mean, it's day one post-op, and I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Weiss Eye Center is the only clinic to offer blade-free Z-LASIK in the Northland. To find out more and to arrange your free consultation, call 218-625-1917 today or visit weisseyecenter.com for more information. Weiss Eye Center. See the best.
If you're looking for a great hang in downtown Duluth, I highly suggest Carmody's Irish Pub. They're located at 308 East Superior Street, open Tuesday through Sunday. The host and hostess are Eddie and Liz. Eddie is a retired Chicago cop. If he happens to be in the club when you're there, talk to him. He's got more stories than I do. They've also got a great jam session every Tuesday night from 8 to 11 with Bruce Woodman. So if you're a musician, tried and true, that has been out there playing and just want to go try out some new stuff, go down and hang out with Bruce and the crew. Or if you're just up and coming, bring your horn or your stringed instrument or just want to sing. Go sit in with Bruce Woodman every Tuesday night at Carmody's Pub, 308 East Superior Street.
River City Records and Books, voted Best Record Store of 2023 in the Twin Ports by the Duluth Reader, has in stock thousands of new and used vinyl records, from classic rock to punk, grunge, and metal, to hip-hop, rap, and jazz, reggae, and dub. Thousands of books, CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray, and VHS. Also a large selection of cassettes, comic books, and music magazines. Stop in and see them at 1814 West Superior Street in the friendly Lincoln Park Craft District. Open 9 to 7, 7 days a week.
Every day deserves a superior beer. Earth Rider Brewery's decorated brewers hand-select hops that lend citrus notes to the crisp and easy-drinking Superior Pale Ale. Visit Earth Rider Brewery's Cedar Lounge Tap Room on the Working Harbor in Superior for their award-winning flagship and seasonal brews on tap and to go. To find out much more about Earth Rider Brewery events, join the mailing list and locate Earth Rider Beer near you at earthrider.beer. Hold fast.
Hi, this is Liberace with my good friend Liza Minnelli.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, I didn't see you there. You can listen to us on Stars Over the Prairie with Paul Metsa on KDAL.
We cover the waterfront. We go from Liberace. Thanks, Lee. That was a nice intro. And now we're going to be talking to one of the greatest folk singers in the history of modern folk music, legendary folk singer Dave Van Ronk, who is considered the mayor of McDougal Street. In fact, there's a book written about him called The Mayor of McDougal Street. Said that our friend Tom Paxton, who we spoke to in September, was one of the first musicians that started writing original material in the late 50s and early 60s in the halcyon days of the Greenwich Village folk scene. We really hit it off when we chatted. This is going to take us to the end of the hour on Stars Over the Prairie. We sure appreciate you listening. Tell your friends. We're here on KDAL, 610 AM, 103.9 FM every Saturday from 10 a.m. to noon. And stream us live and find podcasts at www.kdal610.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the great Tom Paxton. Before this, there's a legendary folk singer playing in town next Wednesday at the West Theater with a band called the Don Juans. Tom Paxton was a seminal folk artist from the Greenwich Village folk scene. His songs have been recorded by such people as Doc Watson, Joan Baez, Sandy Denny, Judy Collins, the Weavers, Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Kingston Trio, the Chad Mitchell Trio, John Denver, and Dolly Parton.
So a bunch of nobodies.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Here's a little bit of our conversation, then we'll be back with Eddie Gleason from Carmen's Pub. I could not be more excited to talk to our guest tonight. I've been a fan of his since Richard Nixon was in office. In fact, when I was a young, budding folk singer on the Iron Range in a little group called Paul and Christian, we performed one of Tom Paxton's songs called The Last Thing on My Mind. He is he's one of the seminal figures in the New York City Greenwich Village folk scene. He's performing in concert with the Don Juans Wednesday night at the West Theater in Duluth, Minnesota, on September 26th, the night after at the Cedar Cultural Center. He's an American singer-songwriter. His career spans more than 6 decades. In 2009, Tom Paxton received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He's also a music educator as well as an advocate for folk singers to combine traditional songs with new composition. You want to talk about some of his songwriting credits? Let's talk about who's recorded Tom Paxton songs, and this is just a short list. Judy Collins, The Weavers, Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, Sandy Denny, Joan Baez, Doc Watson, Harry Belafonte, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Porter Wagner, Marianne Faithfull, the Kingston Trio, the Chad Mitchell Trio, John Denver, and none other than Dolly Parton. If I wanted to tell you more about Tom Paxton, it would take up the whole show, but I'd rather talk to him in person. Mr. Paxton, how are you this evening?
Call me Tom. And
Thank you.
You forgot to mention Tiny Tim.
Oh, there you go. Who actually passed away in Minneapolis.
Did he really?
Yeah,
he was a sweet man. I knew him.
He passed away on stage.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, what a way to go out, though, right?
I guess, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Tiny Tim.
Well, he was a sweet man. He was as he seemed to be. He was, as somebody once described, he said he was out where the buses don't run. But he was a very, very nice guy who had a real reverence for the old songs that he liked to sing, like Tiptoe. That's about all I can tell you. That I didn't know him well. I just know that everybody who knew him liked him a lot.
I know Bob Dylan spoke highly of Tiny Tim.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you know Wavy Gravy?
Oh, yeah, Hugh Romney.
Yeah, well, he was my roommate back in the village. And,
really?
And there was a show that he and Tiny Tim did with Moondog. The three of them did a show.
Wow.
People came out of that show with their eyes going in circles.
Wow.
It was a mind blower. I wish I had seen it, but Wavy Gravy said it was a trip on a trip.
And Moondog was that incredible. He was like a composer, and he appeared on the street dressed kind of like a Viking.
A Viking, yeah, with a spear and a helmet and a robe. You'd see him on 6th Avenue, up in the 50s on the 6th Avenue.
Oh,
it was wild.
You know, speaking of another Minneapolis connection, I don't know when's the last time you spoke to Mr. Gravy, but he married a woman from Minneapolis.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah,
he had good taste.
I had a good friend who was good friends with both of them. But let's talk a little bit about, when you mentioned Tiny Tim and Moondog, I remember the first time I went to Greenwich Village in '84, and I had the honor of debuting at Folk City in 1986. But for me, as a young folk singer growing up on the Iron Range, Greenwich Village was the promised land.
Yeah.
And I was reading a quote where the mayor of McDougal Street, none other than Dave Van Ronk, said, "You were actually one of the first guys that were known for writing your own material before Bob Dylan."
Well, that's just because I got there before Bob, that's all. I got there in 1960, and he came in 61. Phil Oakes came in 62, and Eric Anderson came in 63. So we kind of hit it in waves.
It must have been just, when I played, of course, at Folk City, but then over the years, I went, when I was back in the 80s, I was able to go to the Kettle of Fish when it was still on McDougal, and which was, of course, right above the Gaslight. But talk about, I just listened to an interview when you saw Bob Dylan typing the lyrics to Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. And then the first time you heard it, if you could retell that story, because that's one of the greatest songs of all time.
Well, it is. I got to work. We had this room up over the Gaslight where we left our guitar cases and stuff. And we had a poker game going there all night. And there was a portable typewriter that Hugh Romney, that Wavy Gravy, left. And so I got to work, and Bob was in there just taking the paper out of the typewriter. I said, "What you doing?" And he said, I've just been writing this. What do you think? So he handed it to me. And I read, skimmed down a page of it, and I said, this is really good. It's Lord Randall in 1962 or whatever the year was.
Right.
And he said, what should I do with it? And I said, well, you could send it to some Poetry Quarterly or something, and they'd pay you $25. Or you could make a song out of it. He said, yeah, I think I'll make a song out of it. So about 2 nights later, like 1 in the morning, he got up, probably with a couple of glasses of wine in him, and sang it for the first time. It was, and then about 5 years ago now, they apparently every 5 years around the world they have Dylan birthday concerts, and so I was in one of them. They said, come and be in this. I said, sure. So I sang 3 songs. I sang One Too Many Mornings, Tomorrow Is a Long Time, and that one. And wow. I had like 3 music stands side by side so I could put all the lyrics. What was I going to do? Memorize the thing?
Right.
But I'll tell you what, Paul, it was fun to sing that song.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, and it's hard, oh man, I hand it up, I guess, but I love singing. I think it's a great song.
Well, Tom Paston, my guest, has played thousands of gigs. Like I said, he's playing at the West Theater in Duluth with the Don Juans September 25th, and at the Cedar Cultural Center. Both places I played, both great venues. Tom, you're going to really enjoy it if you haven't played there.
No, I played there, and I like it a lot.
And, yeah.
The Cedar feels to me as much like the 60s as any place I play.
And it's, part of the West Bank, which is really, that was the scene that started in Downtown where, Dylan and Kerner and Glover got started, then moved to the West Bank in the early 60s. But there was a fella that played the Gaslight. He recently passed away. We had as a memorial at the Caboose Bar, which is up the street from the Cedar. If you ever bumped into Spider John Kerner.
Oh my God, John! I didn't know he'd passed.
Yep, passed.
Yeah. No, I thought a lot of him. I thought he was great.
He tells a lot. He would tell. We got to be really good buddies over there, and he told me.
Now, what was the other place there on the where I played a few years after that?
Probably the Cafe Extemp.
The what? Extemp. Yeah. I played there with Bob Gibson and Ann Hills. We had a little trio we called Best of Friends.
Yeah.
And we played the Extemp, and I loved that.
It was booked by a guy named Steve Alaric, not with us anymore, whose brother you probably have run into. He was a folk singer and also author and columnist for one of the Boston newspapers, Scott Alaric.
I loved Scott Alaric. I considered him a close friend. I just loved to tell stories with him. He knew all kinds of stories about movie stars from like the 30s and 40s. He knew Jack Benny stories that would have you on the floor. He was a delightful man.
I said, boy, I just really enjoyed meeting that guy. And I was amazed at how tall he was. He used to play football in Oklahoma. I think he went to Okima High School. He was at that Okima High School football team.
Okay.
And, of course, Okima was Woody Guthrie's hometown.
right, this is Liberace with my good friend Liza Minnelli.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, I didn't see you there. You can listen to us on Stars Over the Prairie with Paul Metsa on KDAL.
Oh, I miss Lee. Those years we had together were fun, though. I'm so glad I was able to get that promo from him before he left this earthly coil.
Do you still have that outfit he gave you?
And it still fits.
Really?
Yeah. I might wear it when I debut Paul Metsa and the Tiltown Titans tomorrow at Carmody's Pub at 308 East Superior Street.
The master of Segway.
We are from 4 to 6, and I have the proprietor of that story joint with me right next to me in the studio, Eddie Gleason. Eddie, how are you?
So we wound up interviewing Eddie Gleason on the rest of that show.
Do we got any Tom Paxton left?
I don't think we have any more Tom Paxton left.
Well, Eddie's a great guy. He's been running Carmody's Irish Pub with his lovely wife, Mary Elizabeth.
And you have a solo show coming up.
That's tomorrow. So let's hear from Eddie. He's a character. I will be there at 308 East Superior Street, Carmody's Irish Pub, from 4 until 6 p.m. solo. And we're going to let the weather warm up, and then we're bringing the Tiltown Titans back, where we've been doing Sundays in the fall. But Eddie's a retired Chicago cop and grew up in Duluth and then moved to Chicago, spent a lot of time chasing criminals down in Florida, and just a character of characters. And we had a little Eddie on with Tom Paxton, so we're going to hear a little bit from Eddie today. Sorry for the confusion, but Chris and I both had busy weeks, and we'll get it more together next week on Stars Over the Prairie. But in the meantime, anything coming off the airwaves here at the big K 103.9 FM or
610 a.m.
610 a.m. on the big K is good stuff to hear. So here's a little bit of Eddie Carmody Gleason.
So I started coming back and forth here. As you well know, there's a federal prison here. I was not a resident, but sometimes would have to...
Camp Walkaway is what they call it.
I'd have to bring people back to a certain place in Chicago for trial. And I was also doing outside sales as well. I had a great gig when I was in law enforcement, and I was able to do outside as well. So I sold paintbrushes, and I loved going. I saw more in Minnesota than my ancestors ever saw,
right?
Because I had to hit up all these hardware stores. But Rick Boo was really the formative reason.
Was that Ben Boo's son?
Ben Boo's son, yes. And Rick...
There's a great picture of Mayor Boo down at the City Hall.
Oh, with the pipe.
Oh, my God.
Yes.
And one of those jackets that had the leather elbow pads.
Yeah.
Oh, classic. In fact, I'm thinking about starting to smoke a pipe.
First Republican
with
my
actual
daddy
tobacco.
ever voted for.
You have to have the jacket, though. You can't do the pipe without the jacket.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Rick was, I came through here, I think it was 95, 96, and I walked into the lobby of the North Shore Theater. I was taking a trip down memory lane. I hadn't lived in Duluth for almost 30 years, or had been to Duluth and more than 25. And I meet this guy, and he tells me who he is, and he says, "You want to stick around? This is what I have going on tonight." And next thing you know, that was my local. I was going to sit up in the balcony bar, or I should say the lobby bar, and the amount of acts that he brought through. Coco Taylor, he was the first one. There were so many of them that just I'm racking my 66-year-old brain here, but I was just amazed. And then,
Eddie, you're 66?
66. Going to turn 67.
But you know what? You've got the body. You still have the body of a 65-year-old.
No. More like a 77-year-old. Any rate, music was such an important part of my life. I lost my father when I was 12. He was a native of Duluth, well after emigrating when he was 5. But my mother, she never quite took to Duluth. I think it was the weather and the distance that she had from her family. Half of her Irish family had lived in southwestern Ontario. And so she decided that that's where we should set up. 1970 was a terrible year in this country. a really bad year. We had Kent State, and my mother said when they eat their own, we leave. And so that was, but it was terrible for me. I played Little League Baseball. I played American sports like hockey, and certainly Catholic League basketball in the West End. But music was always constant in our house. I mean, my parents were a lot older. I was the shock of 1957. My daddy was 60. Mom was 44. In my house, because we lived 3 blocks away from a Polish parish, they were like the triumvirate in the West End. You had, for each ethnic group, the Irish were all over at St. Clement's. That was our official parish, and with a smattering of Germans and Italians. But St. Jean's, St. Jean de Baptiste, that was for the Métis, Au Français Canadien. And Episcopolska was St. Peter and Paul. And my mother, she didn't want me tramping through the snow like my brother and sister, who were 20-some years older than I. So she said, she went down and registered me with Father Greshik at the Polish parish. And when she told my father, my dad said, Irene, that's the Puski parish. And she said, oh, you think the Poles will give him trouble? And he goes, no, I'm worried about the Irish. And that was so true. That was so true. But my parents loved music, and I was growing up an only child, and they were very worried about that. And they actually took me to see someone because I was starting to talk like my grandmother's contemporaries were still here. They were from Kerry and from the West County Clare, from the west coast of Ireland. And I was starting to pick up their senior citizen mannerisms, and I wasn't socializing well with kids.
Could you do any of those? Do you remember?
Oh, sure.
Well, give us a little bit, Eddie.
A kushla, love. My grandaunt had she wasn't really my grandaunt. She was my grandmother's friend. And Agnes Carmody, who took care of my grandmother, they all spoke real quick Irish. I mean, they were like, it was kind of a mix of Gaeltacht and English, and they were always right to the point. There's no soft setting with the Irish. If you said something nice of someone, that could be an insult. But if you said, I wouldn't wear that, is that what you thought was a good idea? My granny,
I love that.
My granny, who was a wobbly, both my grandparents were very involved in the union movement here. Late 1890s, early 1900s. My granny she'd shame my father. My father had Providence Finance, had the second floor of the Providence building, and was a small loan lender. And my grandmother would sneak out in her late 80s with her pocketbook, and she'd go up to an Italian food market here on First Street, and she'd buy a flat of strawberries and take them down to the Medical Arts Building and to all these, our versions of skyscrapers, and go door to door and, put on the blarney about her being, I'm a widow. Could you help? Do you have any coin? Maybe you could help. And my father'd get phone calls. Your poor mother.
Oh, no.
She was looking for car fare. She has more than enough car fare. Meaning streetcar buses. And she was an amazing human being. I think she was quite angry. About being widowed.
So she was doing that just to make a little extra pin money?
She was always getting the extra pin money. She ran a boarding house at Restormal and Grand Avenue in the West End. And about half dozen years ago, one of my Carmody cousins came over from Ireland. Actually, he lived in South Africa. He's died just recently. But Ed Carmody, we went in the house, and the new owner of the house, who happens to be the beverage manager down at the depot, she said, we found all these things in the walls, like letters, and I haven't even had all of the time. I'm afraid they'll crumble in my hands, so I really need to take them to like a historian, someone that's handled old documents. But they've also found a handgun. Well, my grandfather's brother younger brother was a police officer here for quite a few years. I had gone to the police department, and they have a whole biography on him. But enough of that. Let's talk music, because that was, the music in my house.
I forgot actually what the original question was, but keep going. I love you, Eddie.
Like polka music. I learned how to dance polka as a kid. And
polka was in every household. I think.
It was. Certainly in the West End, you could walk through the alleys and you'd hear it playing. And it wasn't just, the Finns love polka, all the different ethnic groups.
They all had their own polkas,
yes,
didn't they? Yeah.
Yes, they did. And the other one with my father turned me on to John Philip Sousa, because one of our distant cousins was in the John Philip Sousa band.
Cool.
And Spanish. I had another, I don't know how he was my uncle, but he had been in the Boer War, the insurrection of the Chinese at the turn of the century.
I have a little historical quip here with John Philip Sousa. He played the opening in 1929 of the Fauché Tower.
Oh, really?
In Minneapolis. In fact, he wrote a piece called the Fauché Waltz or some damn thing. And the guy that was putting up the money, I think his name was Fauché, then the crash happened, and that place went in, was going through the Depression, but they brought John Philip Sousa up to perform and wrote a piece for the Fauché Tower. Eddie Gleason, continue. That's just...
from the Clancy brothers were huge in our house.
Yeah, of course.
And St. Patrick's Day, unlike the way it's portrayed today, it's kind of been Las Vegasized. Super Bowl, Super Bowl Tuesday or Super Bowl 17 for the Irish, for anyone who claims or finds or knows someone who's Irish. It was a very quiet day in our house. The aunties and uncles, and when I say aunties and uncles, they probably weren't even related to us. Anybody who was from the old sod, from my grandmother's generation, would come over to the house in the West End, and we'd listen to the Clancy brothers.
That was a great interview with Eddie Carmody. I tell you, the guy is almost like having Robin Williams on the show. You ask one question and just let him talk,
Oh, I know. Well, like I said, I referenced it. He, I asked him a first question, and about 25 minutes later, I said, Eddie, I forgot what I asked you.
Yeah. And you just said, just keep talking.
He's a great guy, man. They do a great job at Carmody's Irish Pub. It's a really, really nice mix. It's kind of where the lion lays down with the lamb down there.
Yeah.
You've got all kinds of different stripes, people, class, creeds, and religions, and different colors, and they all get along down there at Carmody's Irish Pub.
And speaking of that, you have a gig there.
I am playing there Sundays again. We took a little time off to get through dry January. Dry January, good idea for people that want to get in shape, bad idea for the bars. But anyway, so we took a little time off. I was playing there with the Tiltown Titans. I have a great band. George Ellsworth on keyboards, Taylor Shikes on bass, Ian Hopp on drums. Ian's out skiing now, but I'm going to do some solo Sundays there. It gives me a chance to tell a little more of my stories and play my songs. I got a bunch of new ones. 4 to 6 Sunday afternoon at Carmody's Irish Pub, 308 East Superior Street. I also got a really fun gig coming up. I'm going to be, as you know, Chris, I'm a big dog guy.
Yes, you are.
I'm really into dog rescue, and I will be the featured music performer at the Fur Ball Gala, Thursday, March 13th at the Northland Country Club, 3901 East Superior Street. They're going to have gaming, music, great hors d'oeuvres, beer and wine, sponsored by Animal Allies. Find out more, info at animalallies.net. If you got anybody you think would like to tell a good story, good musicians out there, just get a hold of us at Stars Over the Prairie. My personal email is paul@paulmetsa.com. And if you've got any business and you want to get in front of a very committed audience, also let me know. We got really reasonable advertising rates. Just go to paul@paulmetsa.com. We're on